Welcome to So Lounge. Today I'm going to teach you how to use a hem facing to finish a hem. So this is a different technique from anything I've shown you before, and we will be using a facing to finish the hem. Now I am working with McCall's 7862, which is in print, so if you want to go pick it up and try this at home, go for it. And I have my hem facings cut out. These were cut on the fold, that's why the pattern piece is shorter, and then they are both interfaced. So my dress is finished except for the hem, so that's the very last step that I'm going to be doing. And I've got my instructions over here laid out and ready to go. Let's go in for a closer look. So we're here for a close-up of the instructions on the pattern, and we are starting with number 52 down here because I am making view B. So it has the uneven hem facing. The steps are pretty similar for both. The only difference is the shape of the facings. So first we're going to connect the two facings, sew up those side seams, press them open. Then we are going to turn the top edge that doesn't have the notches in it under 1/4 inch. We're going to press it, and then we are going to attach the facing to the bottom of the dress. We are then going to do some understitching to hold that seam in place, and then we are going to flip everything to the inside, and we are going to sew along that 1/4 inch that we finished to secure the hem in place with a permanent stitch line. So I've got my pattern pieces ready to go. I'm just going to unpin number 13, which is the part of the facing that is going to go to the front of the dress. And then I also have 14, which I'm also going to unpin. Just move those pattern pieces out of the way. And we are going to be pinning the interface sides together. So this is what it looks like in the drawing, but they are showing you the right and wrong side. So we're actually pinning the wrong sides together at the side seam notches. Put in a pin, go to the other side, match up those notches, and put in a pin. So I get that edge lined up. There we go. So now we're going to head over to the sewing machine. So I'm at the sewing machine. My machine is turned on, and I am going to be sewing at a straight stitch at my regular length of 2.5. Now, because the pattern instruction doesn't say otherwise, we are going to be sewing this side seam of the facing at 5/8 inch. So just get everything lined up, and then we're just going to sew it real quick. Once you're done with one side, go sew the other side, and then we're going to head over to the ironing board. All right, so we're at the ironing board. I have my side seams on my facing sewn open. So the first thing I want to do is press them open so that they're going to lie flat once we start attaching things together. And I'm just going to give that a quick press. And the next step is going to be to, did I sew this wrong? No. The next step is going to be pressing the edge that does not have the notches. So locate the bottom curved edge on the back facing is the one that has the notches on it. So that'll be an easy way to identify them. We are going to fold a 1/4 inch under with the top facing. So that's what we're going to be doing. All right, so now that we've identified the edge that needs to be pressed a 1/4 inch to the inside, we can use either a regular hem gauge or my favorite, the Dritz EZY Hem, to fold in and press that 1/4 inch. So I'm going to start with the Dritz EZY Hem. It's a little bit faster, and I'm just going to fold up my fabric to the 1/4 inch mark. I'm going to carefully press my fabric at that line. And be careful because the Dritz EZY Hem does get hot. your fabric gets hot, everything gets hot, so be careful. Once that is kind of cooled off, I'm going to move it, and then I am going to go down around the whole facing until everything has a 1/4 inch hem. Let's go in for a closer look. So here we are for a close-up, and I am just folding this edge under a 1/4 inch, and this is the side that is away from the notches. So we got the notches, that's what we're going to connect to the skirt, and then this is how we're going to finish the hem facing with this nice folded over edge. You can call it like the edge, the hemmed hem edge, or whatever you like, but that's what we're basically doing. So I'm going to fold that up. I'm going to then take my iron and give it a little press to get that to stay. And that is the beauty of pressing things with steam, is that they tend to stay. You're kind of making the fabric remember and creating this memory in the fabric with this heat, that's the way it wants to go. So by pressing everything really, really well as you're making it, not only will your garment look better, but you will also not have to baste as much, because I don't like basting, so I try and get out of it whenever possible. Now I'm going to take the same thing with my hem gauge. I'm going to put it down to a 1/4 inch. I'm just going to fold up my fabric, measure it a 1/4 inch. I'm just going to do a little at a time because I don't want it to get out of control. And then I'm going to press. Be careful, move your thumb. Steam comes out from under the edge of the iron, and it just kind of burned me a little bit. But I'm used to that. So just continue to press, and we are going to go all the way around the garment. And like I said, you can do either of these methods. They both work equally well. Just be careful you don't burn yourself. So now that we've got our facing sewn together and we have that top edge of the facing folded under a 1/4 inch, it's time to attach it to the dress. So I have my dress laid out with the front of the dress facing up, and I have the hem just kind of folded over. So I'm going to start on the flatter side, the straight edge of the front of the skirt, and I am just going to match up those notches. Now the key, of course, is to make sure you know which one's the back. So the back one is the longer one. So we are taking our facing and we are matching it to wrong side up. So the facing is going to go like this, and then we're going to match up the notches along this edge down here. Once I find them. And they're over here on the edges, okay? So they're not in the middle, they're on the edges. And here are my notches. So I'm going to match those up on the front and put in a pin. And then I am going to match the other one across the front. And I'm also going to put a pin in the middle just because it's kind of floppy, to just hold everything in place, so when we get ready to sit down at the sewing machine, everything's ready to go. Now I'm going to move around to the side, and I am going to match up those side seams with the side seam of the facing, and I'm going to put pins on each side to hold the side seams open, because I do not want them to bunch up in the seam once we get ready to sew all of this together. So I pinned that one closed. So make sure you pin them all open. And now we're going around the back of the dress. So I'm going to flip my dress over, and I am continuing with my facing. I have to find that. Here's the notch. Okay. So I'm going to match up those notches again. Put in a pin. And I am going to put one over here on the side, because since the back hem of the facing is curved, it's also floppy, and I want to keep everything nice and lined up for the sewing part of this. One more notch to match, and then one more side seam. So here is the notch, Get that all lined up. I'm also going to put a pin at the center back seam and just pin these seam allowances open once again so they don't get caught up and bunchy in the seam that we're getting ready to sew to attach the facing to the bottom of the skirt. So now we're coming around to the other side. I'm going to match up this side seam again, just like I did with the back and the other side seam, and put in some pins to keep everything open and flat. It would help if I matched it up in the right place so that everything lies nice and smooth. There we go. Okay, adding in some extra pins. And once we have pinned everything in place and the edge of the facing is smooth all the way around the bottom edge of our dress, then we're going to head over to the sewing machine and sew it together. All right, so we're back at the sewing machine. I am still going to be stitching at 5/8 of an inch using a straight stitch with a 2.5 length. Now, because this is a lot of bulk in this fabric and we are going in a circle, I have my machine so that I can access the free arm. So I have lifted it out of the table. I've removed the board that's usually in here to create a nice smooth surface. If you have a little platform around your sewing machine arm, make sure you take that off, because it's going to be a lot easier to sew this if we can keep part of the dress underneath the arm as we're going around. It's just going to keep everything a lot smoother and be a lot easier to do. If you don't have that option, you can do this flat, but like I said, it's just harder to keep everything out of the way. So I am going to start on one of the side seams. That is generally what I do when I'm doing this sort of thing. And so I'm going to get that all lined up. Let's go in for a closer look. So here we are for the close-up, and as you can see, this is my 5/8 inch line here, and that's what I have my fabric lined up against. I am starting with the side seam. I think it's the side seam. Yes, I'm starting with the side seam, and I have my pins all in. I need to get my pin cushion all ready. And we are just going to start sewing as we normally would. I'm going to roll the needle in, and I'm going to take a couple of stitches before back stitching. And then I'm just going to go around, removing each of the pins as I get to them. So I've backed out the camera so that you can kind of see how I'm maneuvering the dress under the fabric and the fabric around the arm. So you can see under here, that's where my dress is. It's like the arm is going up into the dress so that we can get the fabric maneuvered around to get this hem sewn in. And now we're coming up to the other side seam. So I want to make sure that my seams are staying open as we sew this facing together. So I'm just keeping everything in line, moving the fabric around as needed to get this all sewn in. We're now coming up to the center back seam. You can see that it's the center back seam because I have my seam allowances pinned open, but there aren't any on this side because we only had side seams for the facing. So I'm going to do one at a time, making sure that stays nice and smooth. And then I'm going to pull out the second pin. And they're still nice and smooth in there, as you can see. And now we're coming back around. So I'm just going to go back over my stitch line a little bit. And now I'm going to back stitch. All right. So now we've got everything lined up and sewn together. The next step is going to be to trim out this seam. Once you've got your seam trimmed, we are going to press it to the bottom edge of this facing. So you want to get your iron, set it appropriately, like a little straggly piece. Still hanging out over here, I'm not sure what happened there. Cut that off. And we're going to be pressing it down away from the body of the dress. So if you look at it, we're going to be pressing it like this, and we're going to be pressing it open. And the reason for doing that is we're going to understitch next. And when you understitch, we're going to be sewing through the facing, and we want to catch that seam allowance. So lay out your garment, press from the inside. And while you're doing this, make sure you don't like press over your 1/4 inch and then unpress it basically, because we don't want that to come undone just because we happen to catch it on the iron as we're pressing open the seam allowance. So I'm going to actually flip my dress inside out. I think that'll make it a little bit easier. And I'm going to move down to this end so that I can work around without having all that extra bulk in the way. There we go. So just press the seam allowance down towards the bottom and work your way around the dress, and then we'll head back to the sewing machine. All right, so we're back at the sewing machine, and this time we are going to be understitching. Now, understitching is sewing very close to this top edge, to the seam, the connected part of the seam, but we're only sewing through the facing. So we're basically sewing through the facing to catch that seam allowance against the facing. And by doing that, we're going to have a really crisp edge along the hem once we flip it under and then finish the hem. So that's kind of the point of doing understitching, is to have a really crisp, sharp edge at the bottom of something, usually a hem, and that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to get everything lined up, and let's go in for a closer look. So I'm doing some understitching, and just a close-up so you can see what I'm talking about. We have our seam allowance pressed towards the facing, and we want to sew very close to this edge. And this stitch line is going to be this edge here. So once we fold it under to finish the hem out, we want a really crisp edge down here. And the way to achieve that is with understitching. So we are going to start at a seam allowance. Again, I think that's a side seam. Is that the side seam or is that the center back? Let's see. That's the center back. So I want to start at a side seam just because it's easier for me. So we're going to start at this side seam here, and we want to get everything lined up. Now we're going to be sewing really close to this stitch line here. So I'm going to line up the stitch line. I'm going to move this down so you can see it a little better. I'm going to line up the stitch line with the inside edge of my presser foot, because that's what I'm going to be doing. That's how I'm going to just keep my needle lined up. So it's going to be a really close stitch. And then also by doing that, this outer edge is going to be under the presser foot for the most part, and then that'll help keep everything smooth and lined up. So I am just going to get started. And so you can see what I'm doing. I don't know why that's bunching a little bit. There we go. So we just want to keep that all lined up, and we are sewing very close. Okay, so I flipped my dress inside out. That way we can utilize this arm of the machine to kind of help keep everything lined up and moving around smoothly. I don't know why I didn't start that way, but we can continue now and just sewing this edge around. And now we are just coming back around, and I'm just going to go back over part of that stitch line to lock it all in. There we go. Okay, so when you're finished, you should have a stitch line just below the seam line on the facing. So you can see that's what we've been doing. And by doing that, we are holding this seam allowance over towards the facing. And the next step is going to be to press. So we're going to press this all in the right direction, and then we are going to put in the final stitch line along this top edge. So I'm back at the ironing board, and we are pressing the facing towards the body of the garment. So we're prepping it to go sew in this final stitch line and finish the hem once and for all. My iron is set to cotton and I have it on high steam, and so I am just going to go in and press this. I did put some pins in to just speed up the process once we do get back to the sewing machine. It's also helping get the facing going in the right direction. So I am just going to move around my garment, pressing all of those edges and getting everything ready for that last line of stitching that we need to do. So just continue pressing, and then once you're finished, I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. So I'm back at the sewing machine for the last time, and if you read the instructions, at this point they say to put in a line of basting stitches and then go back in and sew your final stitch line close to the top edge of the facing. Now, initially I did not want to do basting stitches because I just don't like doing that to hold things in place when you can press and do a good job and keep everything secure just as easily. But because this is a curve and we are folding it back up, I want to just do a quick row of basting stitches to just make sure that I don't need to ease anything in anywhere. So that's why we're doing it here. That's why we would do it in a regular hem, is to just allow for an extra row of stitches to ease in if we need to before we put in our permanent stitch line. So I am just going to line up the edge of my facing on, I'm just going to do it at 5/8. That way it's going to be below the stitch line. We're probably going to pull it out. We're going to have to pull it out because we don't want it to see once we have the dress finished. But that way I can still ease if I need to do that final stitch line. So I'm just going to run that around my machine real quick. I do have it on a basting stitch, so set your machine accordingly. And then we'll go in with the permanent stitch line. And it looks like everything is lying very, very flat and we do not need to ease anything in. So that's good news. So next I'm going to line up the top edge of the left edge of my presser foot with the top edge of the hem. And that's the part that we folded under 1/4 of an inch. And I am going to adjust my needle and move it over as far as it will go to the left so that I can sew really, really close to that edge so that I catch the 1/4 inch folded under, and then that stitch line will show up on the outside of my dress. Last thing to do is remember to reset the stitch length so you are no longer basting and you are back at your usual stitch length. For me, that is 2.5. Let's go in for a closer look. All right, so I have everything lined up and I have moved my needle over so you can see my needle's over to the far left point. I have everything all lined up and I'm just going to start stitching along this top edge and keeping that edge lined up with the left side of my presser foot. Just like the other times when we've been working on the hem, I do have my dress going under my free arm, so it's just easier to maneuver and keep all the fabric and everything straight. We are coming back around to the side seam where we started. And I'm just going to overlap those stitches and then just do one tiny little back stitch just to make sure everything's secure. Lift up your presser foot and we're going to cut off those threads. And you can see we now have the permanent hemline in there holding the hem in place on both sides, and we're going to go back in and take out this basting stitch line, which it turned out we did not need. Once you're finished sewing in that final stitch line, go back, pull out all that basting stitches, and you will have a finished hem. And like I said, this is B, so it's the uneven hem version, and it's all done. A hem facing is really great when you have an uneven hem. It's an easy, quick way to get that all finished and not have to stress about folding it under and basting and all that good stuff. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a stitch. And if you've got questions but no one to answer them, head on over to Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by Sew Lounge. It's an interactive Facebook group where you can ask all the questions you want and I will get you some answers. I go live in the group on Wednesdays, so check the events for the schedule. Until we meet again, happy sewing!